Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual field trip. Just a few reminders before we begin. These trips are live and we could experience some technical issues. If that is the case, please be patient as we resolve them. And as always, we welcome and encourage your questions with Palm Beach County students. Please ask your questions when people meet. Chat and everyone else, you are welcome to use poll everywhere. We hope you are ready to learn something new and have some fun too. Benji, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm so delighted that you're here with us this afternoon. We are coming to you live from Frenchman's Forest Natural Area up in Palm Beach Gardens. I love this site. This isn't one of our big expansive sites that we sometimes visit, but this site is so cool because it is in the urban area and it has so many different habitats. So, it has everything from mangrove swamp to oak hammock to scrubby flatwoods and pine flatwoods. And of course, my favorite, the swamp. So we're going to be meeting some of those habitats today, but we have really, really special guests because today we've got our friends from Busch Wildlife Sanctuary here. We've got 2 animals to release that have been rehabilitated, and then we've got 3 educational animals that you guys are going to meet along the trip. So make sure, oh man, we've got woodpeckers flying into the palm trees. This place is so alive. So make sure you stay for the whole hour because it's going to be packed full of animals and so much fun interaction. All right, so let's go over here. We're going to release our first animal. So you guys know Kylie Ariotti. She is from ERM, from our crew. And we also have Rebecca Reed here, and she is the Director of Outreach and Education for Busch Wildlife Sanctuary. Guys, I'm going to let you take it away because we need to get this animal in the air.
It looks like it's almost ready to go. So, Rebecca, tell me, who do we have in here? Who is about to be let out?
So we actually have an osprey with us today, and this osprey was apparently found in the road and was covered in mites, which are kind of like little teeny tiny spider parasites that can affect the bird's feathers.
So, got cleaned up. Now it has the full bill of health to say, let's go.
Yep.
Frenchman Forest. Some people, Benji was talking about these different habitats. When we talk about a mangrove habitat here, these birds are also known as seahawks. So these are birds that predominantly spend their life around bodies of water. They are the only species of hawk that actually dive down to capture their food. And they actually have a really special adaptation. Do you want to tell them what it is?
It's being called a zygodactyl.
So I don't know if you guys can see this. Their feet are pretty special. So these are similar to owl's feet, unlike any other of the raptor species. So something like a bald eagle or a red-shouldered hawk. These guys actually have 2 toes in the top and 2 toes on the bottom, with one of those toes being able to flip around depending on how they need to use it. And that allows them to expertly capture those fish when they're going fully submerged. They get a good grip on it and then can fly something almost its weight or more back to a tree stag.
They also have an added bonus of having essentially like spikes on their feet too, so when they're grabbing onto slippery fish, they're not so hard to hold.
So, do you think this bird's ready to go?
I think he's ready to rock and roll.
All right, let's see. So hopefully, as you guys can see out here in the distance, these trees love stags. So these dead pine trees that we see out here in the distance. So ideally, it's going to get a nice little runway here to take off, and then we'll get to meet our second creature.
Alrighty.
So while this bird is hopefully taking off, some other fun facts about our osprey. They are monogamous. So that means that in general, they mate for life once they find a pair, coming back to the same nest spot every time, and both of them, the boy and the girl, doing the work. Now, while we see a lot of ospreys in Florida here, ospreys can actually be found on every continent in the world except Antarctica. So an osprey, no matter where you are in the world, you can see one of these seahawks doing their thing. You can also hear them. They make these extremely loud, piercing screeches just to communicate with each other and help each other find food out in the water landscape. Get out. Sometimes our friends get a little unsure.
Hey, we have a question about what type of fish does the owl eat?
So what you guys are seeing right here is an osprey. It's an osprey, not an owl. And he's actually being really cooperative. And you can see those feet. And so look at those massive talons on there. Those are for grabbing those fish. These birds almost exclusively eat fish. So they're eating fish in freshwater habitats, also in estuaries and along the coastline and oceans. They have this really dramatically wide wingspan. Um, it's about what, Rebecca, 4 feet wide or so?
Maybe.
So even though this bird, woo, there he goes.
All right, so that was a typo. They said they meant osprey, not owl. So what fish specifically?
So it really depends on where they are, because again, these fish or these birds range all over North America. So if they're in Yellowstone, National Park in Wyoming, they're eating trout from the lakes. If they're here and they're in freshwater habitats like Lake Okeechobee, they're eating bass and they're eating gar. If they're in the estuary, they're eating mullet. If they're on the coastline, they're eating, jacks and blue runners and all of these whiting and all of these other fish. So it really depends
Sometimes
on
the fish
where
that
they
they
are.
catch is like dragging them down. It is so impressive. And then they get it up to the tippy top of one of these dead trees and start chowing down. So pretty cool bird. We're glad it finally took off. Really proud of it. Everybody, round of applause for the bird. I got a little nervous, that first time. So we're going to come over and meet our second creature of release today. This is a special creature. It is an opossum. So we're going to learn a little bit about how this creature got here, just like our osprey, as well as what they do in the ecosystem here in Florida, especially a great place like Frenchman Forest here.
All right, guys. So Rebecca, I know that you and I both have a soft spot for opossums.
Very much.
Virginia opossum, not possum, right?
No.
There are animals in the world called possums.
They are. We typically just kind of cut off the first half of a Virginia opossum's name and call them possums, but possums are from Australia, essentially.
Yes, so that is the possum without the O. What we have is Virginia opossums. They're really, really special. In fact, they're unique in North America because
They're the only marsupial.
they're the only marsupial. And so remind us what a marsupial is.
A marsupial is a mammal that has a pouch, just like a kangaroo.
Exactly. So the babies grow up in mama's
They do.
pouch, and then they kind of hang on to her as she's moving around. So what's the story with this animal? What happened?
So this little opossum, and it is actually quite small, was found swimming around in somebody's pool. And when they fished her out, they found that she was very, very skinny, and she has anemia or had anemia due to being covered in fleas. So fleas will suck their blood, and it affects them. Yeah,
Oof.
it sounds really gnarly.
Oh, yeah. Now, a lot of people have misconceptions of opossums. Okay, they're really cool. They're marsupials. Their fur looks a little wiry, but it is super soft. These guys are like a pillow. They have this really cool defense mechanism. So, Rebecca, what happens if they feel threatened?
So when they feel threatened, the first thing that they actually do is like open up their mouth and they show all their teeth, and they have a lot of razor sharp teeth. So that's pretty intimidating in itself. But after that, if they get just a little bit more scared, they literally pass out and play dead.
So, literally unconscious, roll over, their mouth is agape, and they emit this kind of gnarly smell
They
when
do.
that happens.
They do.
So think of like if you guys have seen Fainting Goats on YouTube. If you haven't, spend like 3 hours of your life watching Fainting Goats. But opossums kind of similar. That's a defense mechanism. Now, the last thing that makes opossums really, really cool and kind of the misconception is a lot of people, if they see these in their yard or something, they'll think, oh, I have to call pest control. These are a pest. That is completely the opposite,
Not
right?
at all.
Because these guys are pest control.
They are pest controllers, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So these are not pests. They are essentially like our cleanup crew. They help us to clean up the world around us. So they will eat fresh fruit, rotting fruit, live animals, dead animals, and they eat ticks, and lots of them. And we all know that ticks can actually make us sick. They can spread diseases. So these guys help to curb the spread of disease and to clean up all that yucky stuff that we don't really want laying around.
All right, the last thing I want to talk about is part of Busch Wildlife Sanctuary's mission is rehabilitating wildlife, okay? Remember, wildlife, native wildlife. This animal is really, really small, but it's so important because when you see this animal, you might initially think, oh, it's so small, I want to grab it and hold it and protect it. But that's not what this animal was born to do. This animal was born to be wild, right? So like, just tell us about your kind of ethos at Busch as far as rehabilitating animals as fast as possible and getting them back out into the wild.
Oh, 100%. So we try our best to rehabilitate and release these animals, especially as quickly as possible, because we don't want them to get accustomed to people. Actually, part of the sanctuary itself is to keep the animals that are being rehabilitated away from the public eye so that they don't see people and they're not used to seeing us, so that they don't associate with us. So these animals, I mean, the way I like to put it is, I know that we see them as cute and cuddly and we want them as pets in our house, but do you really think this opossum is going to be happier in your house being a pet or out in the wild with their friends and family doing opossum things?
Yes. So let's get this opossum on the ground so it can go do opossum things.
Benji, we have a couple questions. I don't know if you guys want to answer before you release, as you're releasing. We have one osprey question, two opossum questions, and then a generalized Busch wildlife question.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
So going back to the osprey, how big can ospreys get? And does their gender affect how large they are?
Okay, so ospreys, you know, this is kind of a misconception with birds. I run into it all the time, especially with like novice birders. They'll be like, "Oh, look at that osprey! It's smaller. That must be a juvenile." You know, when birds fledge out of the nest, they're pretty much full grown. You know, they grow incredibly fast in the nest. They get packed full of calories, and then when they fledge and they go off on their own, they're pretty much full grown. So these birds are going to have a wingspan. You know, you saw how big it was, which maybe the size of a basketball, but not as, you know, wide and round, you know, more slender. But that little small bird, compact size, opens up its wings to over 4 feet wide. And those wide wings allow them to soar and glide and hunt for fish really easily on the air. I think there was another question about differences between males and females. We're going to talk about that with owls. A good rule of thumb, it's not universal, but a good rule of thumb with raptors, meaning hawks, owls, eagles, is that the females are larger than the males. So that is the rule of thumb. It is true with ospreys. It's really difficult to tell if you just see one individually, but if you see them next to each other, you will be able to spot that difference. And we're going to tell you why when we meet our last educational animal, why that is, especially with the species we're going to introduce you to, that the male is smaller than the female. Okay.
All right. The opossum questions, we have one about what is their life expectancy and why are there so many of them in the neighborhoods?
Okay, so life expectancy is, unfortunately, it's pretty short.
So yeah, so their life expectancy in the wild is maybe 1 to 2 years. In captivity, it's about 3 to 4 if we're lucky. So they essentially are just the type of animal that has lots and lots of babies, and they procreate pretty quickly and they just die kind of young. But when it comes to them being found in neighborhoods, it's because of the fact that they eat everything. So they are attracted to our garbage and the fun things that we like to throw away. And then also habitat loss is a really big thing too. So with these animals running out of space to live, our yards are essentially the wild at this point. So those are 2 reasons why you might see them in your yard. And they're really good with cohabitating with people.
Yeah, you almost never see them because they hang out up in the trees during the day and then they go scurry around and find things to eat, do pest control at night. Yep. So let's get this opossum on the ground. Oh, look at him. He's doing the mouth opening. There he goes. Okay, and you guys may be able to see his little tail moving.
You can see that. Like,
all right, so there we go. So he's disappearing right into the ferns, right getting back to do opossum things. Okay, go over here.
Benji, a couple more questions. They want to know.
Really quick,
can they carry diseases? Do they carry young in a pouch? And then who do you call if you're not calling pest control if there is an issue?
Okay, so first of all, yes, they do carry their young in a pouch like a kangaroo. They're marsupials. What was that first question?
Diseases.
Oh, diseases.
So, well, they do have their own, diseases and things like that. But the first thing we think of when we see mammals, especially like an opossum that might look kind of wild and mangy, is does it carry rabies? And opossums are not considered a rabies vector species. Essentially, their body temperature is a little too low to harbor the virus. So there you go. They're not really big disease carriers.
And I think hopefully what you guys take away from today is if you see an opossum in your neighborhood, do not call pest control, because they are the pest control and they are doing nature's work. They are cleaning up your neighborhood. They are getting rid of rats and garbage and rotting fruit on the ground and ticks. So if you see them, enjoy them, celebrate them. Do not call pest control. If you ever find an injured animal that is obviously lethargic, it's not moving away from you, whatever, that's when you call Busch Wildlife Sanctuary. Okay. All right. So we're going to leave you guys with Kylie. She's going to talk to you about habitats, and we're going to see you guys on the boardwalk in a few minutes.
Hi, you guys. So super great. That little possum took off immediately. We didn't think that was going to happen. And it showed exactly what Rebecca was talking about, that with all of that teeth. I don't know if you guys got to see that. That's its really only true defense mechanism, is to be as big and scary as possible. So habitats. So Benji kind of touched on them a little bit when we first got here. But when we think of Florida, we think of Florida as flat, right? That's pretty much all Florida is flat, flat, flat. But if you guys are able to take a look just between this little pathway here, what we see off to the right side of your screen versus the left side of your screen, if Alicia holds it both ways and then pans. So what we see now is what we consider a scrub land. So this is pine flatwood, a scrubby pine flatwood. So we see an intermixed community of pine trees, cabbage palms, as well as these like Leonias and different kinds of plants on the bottom, and little baby oak trees. So this like scrubbiness. This is managed by fire or mechanically by us chopping up plants in the case of an area like this where there's a lot of urban areas surrounding us where we can't always set prescribed fires out here. But then you can see how quickly this habitat can change. So if we pan around, as you guys see here, the habitat is completely different. We now have dominating oak trees growing really large. We have different cabbage palms, and then we'll have a bunch of different hardwoods. We have wild coffee all through here. This is now turning into a tropical hardwood hammock. So we're talking just a few feet apart, and the way that this habitat changes is truly by inches. And so what we're going to do is, in this really small, less than 200-acre site, you're going to see how quickly that can change. All the vegetation around us, the habitat can change just based on moving a few feet one way or the other, and that's all because of inches up and down. So let's come check out how we are going to change again. So we're going to end today's trip really immersed in this beautiful hardwood tropical hammock. It's my favorite. It's where you think about those giant oak trees, those really long-lived live oaks, covered in ferns and moss and lichens. But in between these, there's even more depressional habitat. There's areas where we, again, lose a couple inches, and then what happens? Water collects in Florida. So right here.
Kylie, there's a question about the wild coffee. Is that able to be harvested like we would, buy at the store?
It is. So come on over. Oh, sorry. I hit you guys. So it's not necessarily a coffee bean that you would buy at the store. You can see it all here. It's all of this textured zebra-like leaf that you have here. You can find it through tropical hardwood hammocks and in coastal dunes systems sometimes if it's really well shaded by cocoa plum or by sea grape. But these are the beans or the berries with the bean inside, and they are caffeinated, but it's not the same as the coffee bean that we think of today. Instead, they have a smaller amount and they almost are more brewed like a tea. So there's actually a shop over in St. Petersburg, Florida on the West Coast that does sell wild coffee tea that you can have as your morning caffeine fix. So really good question.
Kylie, there was another question about any controlled burns at Frenchman's. So do you guys do any prescribed fire at Frenchman's?
So yeah, we kind of talked briefly on that. So due to this habitat being so urbanized, I mean, I wish I could throw a drone up so you guys could see. We are less than a mile from the Gardens Mall. If you guys have ever been to the Gardens Mall on PGA Boulevard, this is literally a mile away from that. So we are so close to all of those neighborhoods that surround the greater Gardens Mall area. And because of that, that makes it very difficult for us and other groups to be able to do a prescribed burn with actual fire. This habitat could handle it super, super well. We have enough fire breaks and wetland pockets, as well as the river and the mangrove pockets that we have that would stop the fire to control it. But the smoke would be really, really hard. Even if we had a good direction of it going straight east over the waterway and towards the ocean, there's a bunch of houses in between here and the ocean and the intercoastal waterway still. So it would be a nuisance. So instead, when we were actually out releasing the osprey, what you saw was a bunch of chopped vegetation in the scrubby open area. So that's all baby vegetation that's starting to come off after they came out and manually chopped. So that's one of the ways that we manage our natural areas when we can't necessarily put fire to the ground due to the location of the natural area itself. Good question. So we're talking inches of elevation changes, right? So taking this hardwood hammock, take in this upper story where we see these myrtles and we see these black ironwoods and we see oaks, cabbage palms. And then all of a sudden, you guys, we go down a couple more inches and it changes again. And we see the introduction of different vegetation. So where now we went from this oak hammock and now we are in a cypress swamp. We have now entered the swamp. How far did I walk, Alicia? Maybe 10 feet. That's how quickly the land can change in Florida by just those few inches. So here in this cypress swamp, that's where we came from. Not too far away at all. Here in this cypress swamp, so you guys have probably heard of cypress trees before. They are related to the giant redwoods out west, the sequoias. They can grow up to 120 feet. We have two different species, the bald and the pond cypress, and they are historically known for their knees, which scientists are still trying to figure out what those really do. They believe that it's a part of oxygen exchange when there's standing water surrounding the tree. But what's so cool about these plants is they introduced a host of what we call epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that grow on top of other plants. So your mom or your dad or your grandma might have one in the yard on a palm tree, like a orchid tied up to a tree. We have a lot of native orchids, as well as things like this old man's beard or Spanish moss. This is also an epiphyte that grows not only in our hardwood hammocks, but also through our cypress swamps. This is actually, believe it or not, related to pineapple, you guys. This is a bromeliad. And if you had a really, really tight microscope, you would see it's made up of a bunch of little hairs that actually pick up water out of the air. So super cool. Them along with tons of air plants. Let's see if we can get some good looks. Ooh, Alicia, here, there's some good ones here in this cabbage palm. All these air plants as well are in that same pineapple bromeliad related family, and they have little hairs with actually called scales on each of their leaves that allow them to collect moisture through the air. So when we walk into this, from this scrubby pine flatwood into this hardwood hammock, into this little depressional cypress swamp, the humidity has just changed completely. And that is why all this stuff is thriving here. There's so much humidity in the air. There's so much water in the air due to how this habitat sinks down just that few inches. All right, Alicia, where did Benji go?
Kylie.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. A couple different questions. They want to know if all of the trees there and shrubs are all native or if there's any non-native species. They'd also like to know, when we have hurricanes, what is your plan of action when you guys need to clear up the paths for people to come back to be able to visit?
Very, very great question. So to start, someone remind me of the first question.
Native, non-native.
Native, non-native. So we are in what we
and
call
alligators. Are there alligators there?
also a great question. So native, non-native. So we do a really, really good job, where our land managers do, coming out, assessing these areas, going off of the paths actually into the thick of these woods and things that we have out here to determine what kinds of species that we're having growing. Florida is a wonderful home to all invasive species, whether it be a plant or animal. We welcome them all with open arms due to our lovely climate. That doesn't necessarily mean that we want them here all the time. It just means that they're easily able to adapt and live here. So yes, we always are looking, or our land managers at ERM, at Environmental Resources Management, are always looking to see what kind of invasive species might be coming into different areas, as they can come in so many different ways. As we said, this is a natural area. They're surrounded by people. People can drop off plants. When we walk in here, you guys might have heard of a staghorn fern. They are kind of green and they look like almost they're attached to a tree, or your parents might have one in a big ball hanging from a tree outside, and it looks like a little reindeer antlers hanging off of it. That's a staghorn fern. They're not from here, they're from Asia, but they're really popular in the plant trade, and this site gets and receives a lot of them, most likely dropped off by neighbors that no longer want them in their yards. So that's something that we're always keeping up with. We're gonna keep walking, but what was that second question?
About hurricanes, the pathways,
Oh, yeah.
about you guys doing
Yeah.
restoration cleanup.
So as you can see, we have a lot of managed areas that we want to allow people to be able to walk through when they need to, as well as to be what we want to be, which is those fire breaks and things when we do choose to have prescribed fire. But we actually have a whole entire division of land managers at our land manager assistants within Environmental Resources Management, that is their job. They're assigned to a set amount of natural areas, and they come out and they check. So when we had Milton come through and it threw around all of those tornadoes here and there, some of our natural areas did get impacted. Trees came down and they had to come out, identify that. And then we use heavy machinery, just as we would in a roadway, to pick things up and move it. So very good question. Let's keep walking. I think the next question was about alligators. And yes, alligators can exist in any freshwater water body in Florida. There's never a place in Florida that has fresh water where you cannot assume that an alligator wouldn't be there. So in this situation, and you'll see, I think I hear Benji. I don't think he's on the path, but knowing him, he's out in the swamp somewhere. He can't help himself. He has to jump off or jump in or something. There's no water down here right now, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't be gators, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Can you find Benji?
Well, hey guys.
Benji, you can't help yourself, can you? Oh, and you guys, he's surrounded by the cypress knees I was talking about.
Oh, yes. So you guys know me. I love the swamp. So I jumped down here because I found all of these incredible diversity of fern species. And ferns are this really, really cool ancient plant. So I want to start by coming over here. So I want to show you guys two of the more rare ferns that we see here in Florida. And that is because of where they live, which is in the swamp. And what have we spent the last 150 years trying to do? Drain the swamp all over Florida. So you can see these, I mean, this looks like dinosaur level stuff right here. So what we've got here is two fern species. This is the giant leather fern. And then we also have this bract fern that's branched here. This is the royal fern. Now, ferns in general, I said they're an ancient species. These plants evolved well before the dinosaurs even showed up on Earth. So we're talking at least 380 million years ago, maybe even earlier. They're also the second most diverse plant family on planet Earth. So flowering plants, the angiosperms, they are the most diverse, have the most species. But on planet Earth, there is 10,500 different species of ferns. So those outnumber lycophytes, which are this really niche kind of plant called a club moss that grow on the ground, and then gymnosperms. And so you guys know those as like your Christmas trees, you know, pine trees, things like that. So these guys, these ferns are really unique because of how they reproduce. So unlike flowering plants, these ferns produce spores. And those spores fly off of their leaves and then go out into the world and then create new ferns. And one of the ways that we identify the different fern species is by how their sporangia look on the plant. So I want to show you guys that on this giant leather fern and the royal fern. So let's see here if we can find. Oh, did we lose the ones that had the spores on it, Alicia? I feel like we had some before. So the leather ferns, I had a leaf earlier, but the leather ferns are not that dramatic because the entirety of the underside of the leaf is covered in spores. So the underside will turn this golden color, and the whole thing is covered in spores. It's really, really dramatic and pretty easy to see. And I might be able to find a leaf on another plant. Now, this, Alicia, can you see this? This is adorable. This is the fiddlehead of the fern, and this is how new fronds unfurl and come up and open. So these little fiddleheads also were a food source for Native Americans. These are edible. I'm told they kind of taste like asparagus, so I'm sure you guys probably don't like that. But right here we have the royal fern, and the royal fern, remember, the leather fern has spores all over the underside of the leaf. The royal fern actually produce, oh, and I just shook this. I don't know if you can see that, but when I shake this, a cloud of spores releases. So I don't know if you can see that. It gets a little bit cloudy in the video, but we are planting new royal ferns right now.
And you're
In my lungs. So this structure up here is all the sporangia for the royal fern. This is a dead giveaway that we have a royal fern. Let's go check out what other species we got over here. 25?
total till end.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go quick here. We've got 3 more species of ferns here. One is sitting right on this cypress knee, and this is called a golden polypody. This is one of our true epiphytic ferns. So epiphytes are plants that are essentially air plants. They use some other plant root structure, cypress knee as structure, and the roots grow right off of that structure. They collect everything they need, nutrients, moisture from the air, from the humidity in these swamps. So golden polypody is still coughing those spores up. Right here, growing off of this cypress tree, we have sword fern. And sword fern, again, it looks a little different, but we know this is sword fern because on the leaflet, these sporangia are in circles along the edges of the leaf. So sword fern. Then all of this back here, everything else you see, this is called swamp fern. And swamp fern, again, we look at the sporangia, it is in a line down the main rib of this leaf. So this is swamp fern. Duh, we're in the, okay, let me see if I can, this is crazy. All right, stay right there. Wow. Look at that, right in the swamp where he belongs. Oh my, I'm kidding, guys. Rebecca, come on out. So Rebecca is back with us. This is Busch Wildlife's educational alligator, and Rebecca is going to climb up onto the boardwalk with you. I decided to have a little fun with the introduction here, so she's going to tell you more about this. But one of the amazing things that is great to point out with this dry swamp is alligators are a keystone species. So keystone species, what does that mean? That means that just by living this alligator life, he produces habitat for dozens and dozens of other species. And the way that they do that is when they get really big, they have this big muscular body. And when the swamp dries out like it is right now, they will find the lowest part. In fact, under the boardwalk here, it's a little muddy, a little mucky, there's a little standing water. So they'll go to the deepest part of the swamp and they'll move this body around and move that mud out of the way and create gator holes. It's an actual thing in the swamp. And what those deep water refuges do is they not only allow alligators to have access to water in the driest parts of the dry season, but they also allow fish and turtles and other species like otters to continue living their life because they need water as well. So just by alligators doing alligator things, they are a keystone species by creating new habitat. All right, Rebecca, I'm gonna take this beauty Got him?
I got him.
Okay.
He's snorting just a little bit. He's not used to being passed over, right?
So,
go ahead.
Rebecca, this is not an adult, obviously.
Definitely not an adult alligator.
How can we tell besides just the size of it?
Well, we can tell by the coloration. So this little alligator here, you can see how he has those black and yellow stripes that go down his back. That's his baby camouflage, essentially. So baby alligators have those colors to help them to blend into vegetation, any of the plants, you know, the stuff that they're going to be hanging out in on the side of the water. And that's simply because these guys are bite-sized snacks for a lot of animals. So big birds, big fish, and even other alligators like to snack on these guys.
Super cool. So this guy, he's going to get a lot bigger one day, right?
He will. This is a regular alligator, and he will grow to a regular size, which can be 10, 12, 15 feet.
So they have this gorgeous face. Isn't there something special about their eyes or something in the water? Haven't I heard that before?
Are we talking about their eyes glowing in the water?
More of
Or are we
like
talking about our gator goggles?
our gator goggles is what I like to talk about.
So yeah, they have what we call a nictitating membrane. So alligators are going to spend the majority of their time in the water. So when they go swimming, if they submerge themselves, a clear membrane or a clear eyelid comes across so that they don't have to worry about putting those goggles on. They're just built in.
Yeah, and then I think Benji was talking to me earlier. Sometimes the swamp can be really dark and murky and mucky, and they have the goggles, which definitely helps, but how can they see what they're doing? Or do they?
So they might not actually be able to see what they're doing. Benji, do you want to talk about that?
Yes. Okay. So back up on the boardwalk. One of my favorite animals. I'm not excited or anything. Okay. So these animals are like superheroes. They have these different adaptations. Most crocodilians, like American crocodiles, they're a tropical species. So they get cold stress, but alligators can go all the way up into South Carolina, North Carolina. These are places that sometimes the swamps and the lakes freeze over. And so how do alligators deal with that? Well, when they sense that their lake or their swamp is going to freeze over, they stick their nose above the water and then they go into this dormant state. And so there's actually pictures online you can see of massive alligators underneath a frozen lake with their nose just sticking up in the air.
Kind of cute.
Totally cute. Now,
All
the
right, we have
other
a
thing,
question, Benji, really quick about alligators and crocodiles, because I know that there are crocodiles in Florida as well, and people are questioning, how do you know that's not a crocodile?
oh, so it's very easy to tell. Okay, so a couple of really main differences. First of all, the American crocodiles of this size do not have that yellow striping. That's indicator number one. Indicator number two is the snout. Alicia, if you can come up from above, you see that that snout is wide, whereas a crocodile snout is going to be much thinner, about half as thin near the end. And that is because the crocodiles are really evolved and built to eat fish, whereas alligators, as they get bigger and bigger, they're predating bigger and bigger prey. So they're predating big soft shell turtles, and even some mammals like hogs and really big alligators might take a deer. So those are kind of the differences. The other one, if we can come back around to the side, Alicia, and look at those teeth. So you may be able to see, you can see those teeth that are visible, but all of them are pointing down. Crocodiles will have two teeth, one on either side, that you can see that's visible that goes up. So alligators, all the visible teeth are pointing down. Crocodiles have that one towards the snout that goes up. The other really, really cool thing about these animals is I hope you can see those little dots that are all along the upper and lower snout. And that is this superpower. So these these American alligators, they live sometimes in water that looks like chocolate milk. And so you wonder, like, how can they hunt in water where they can't see? And those little dots along the snout are the secret weapon. Those are sensory organs. So they're these little pits, and they have a membrane inside of them that can tell pressure changes. And so imagine if you touch, your desk or your leg or whatever, you can feel that. Well, the alligator can feel that same sensation, but from something moving in the water feet away from it. So it has this little superpower sensory organs all along that snout. So it can feel those fish swimming right by its snout, and then it'll sweep its head sideways and grab that fish and have it snack, even in chocolate milk water. All right. So we're running tight on time. You guys, we're going to run ahead again, and Kylie is going to bring you guys out of the swamp, and we'll see you at the end of the trail. You ready?
Thanks, little alligator. Are they not the cutest thing ever when they're that size? So sometimes, you know, you'll hear them. If you ever hear that one's basically an age where it's going to be, we're going to walk, Alicia, where it's away from its mother at that size. But if you see any a little bit smaller, you'll most likely hear them first, and they make that little noise. I don't know if you guys can hear me make that little chirp, and that's a mommy, come help me, and you want to be nowhere near that. So as you guys can see, we're still walking through this swamp, and Benji kind of touched on a lot of those epiphytes, right? All those different orchids and things that we have. But we're going to be transitioning back into my favorite habitat. One of the reasons why I absolutely love the South, and that's that tropical hardwood hammock. So Benji didn't really get to touch on it very much either, but while we're still in the swamp, you saw him down there. We're on a boardwalk because we're supposed to be out of the water. There's no water out here. As he was saying, there's a small little pool underneath the boardwalk in one of the deepest parts. That's normal. If you guys didn't know, Florida goes through 2 seasons, not its typical 4 seasons. You guys might have heard those before in some class or some person telling you. We have a wet and a dry season. And right now we have entered our dry season, also starting on a La Nina year, which is a whole nother discussion with meteorology, which we won't get into today. But it is very normal for a swamp to dry out. But everything that you see out here, all of these plants, all of these trees in this depressional swamp, this cypress swamp, they need water at some point or this swamp will die. So if we have a drought for a couple years, a lot of these plants will die back. But as soon as water returns to it, the seed source is in the soil and it comes back to life. And all of these different plants pop back up in our swamp understory. Ferns obviously are not as reliant upon, they can't actually be submerged for extended periods of time. So they're thriving in this somewhat wet, dry ecosystem. As you guys can see, the habitat changed again from where we just walked. So you can see that these cypress trees are still intermixed. When we keep changing these habitats by these inches, there's a word for that. It's called an ecotone. So an ecotone is the line basically between where 2 diverse habitats meet. And you can distinctly see that around us. Normally there's an intermixing of the 2 species until the main habitat becomes more dominant of that area. So we're going back into the tropical hardwood hammock. And the reason why I absolutely love this habitat is everything almost gets dressed like a Christmas tree in here. Okay? There's tons of lichens that color these trees, all these different colors. That's all that white stuff that you see on the tree. There's tons of epiphytes like we've been talking about that adorn the trees, and mosses and all different kinds of stuff. But it's also the use of this habitat. So this habitat is a transitional habitat. It is fire resistant. As I said, it holds this humidity. It holds this water source in here that keeps all these different plants alive. A lot of these plants are fruiting plants, so they create different kinds of berries and things, which then becomes a hot spot, a mecca for migratory birds, as well as many other species. I mean, there's not necessarily one species of Florida's native species and migratory species that live in our hardwood hammock, but there's about every single species in Florida that'll utilize a hardwood tropical hammock here in South Florida. Something that's really special. Oh, there's that coffee again that we were talking about. One of the species that is quite well known that actually love these tropical hardwood hammocks is the Florida panther. This is the primo habitat for the Florida panther. And the more of this habitat that we had, the more of those species that we would see everywhere. So as you can imagine, like most of our habitats here that we're seeing, most of the problem that we have with not having these habitats is degradation. So a lot of these habitats get developed. So even little parcels like this mean the world for not only us as humans to be able to come out and experiencing them, but tons of different wildlife, transient and resident, to come and utilize this life. Wow, Alicia, check this stuff out. I hear catbirds and everything. Come on, let's go see what other animals we have. We're gonna touch it up.
So no more boardwalk.
No more boardwalk. Now we are in the density. Alicia, if you look up, we now have this massive oak canopy above us intermixed with cabbage palms. This is signature for a tropical hardwood hammock. Let's come meet some more friends. Do you guys see that? Rebecca, who do you have?
Ah, I have Isma. She's actually one of our Florida pine snakes.
Yzma.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, hi, gorgeous. Guys, this is really, really special because this is a species of snake that is solemnly seen. It doesn't mean that they're not there. It just means that they live a little bit of a different lifestyle than some of our other snakes where you wouldn't necessarily see them on your day-to-day walk. So where do these guys live?
So yeah, even though these animals are out during the daytime, just like you and I, they actually live underground. So good luck seeing them, right? They're going to be in burrows, and they can live in their own burrows, but they can also inhabit gopher tortoise burrows,
Wait,
which is super cool.
you're telling me a snake can dig a burrow?
They can dig a burrow a little bit. Yeah.
How?
By having specialized scales.
Oh.
They also have a cute little shovel nose. So if you look at her little nose there, that nose is kind of upturned. So essentially what they'll do is they'll take their little nose, they'll wiggle it underneath of the leaf litter and into the sand. They kink their head to the side and they scrape the sand back. And every time they scrape sand, it catches on all those special scales. So then they have hundreds of little shovels helping them.
I am never going to complain about digging ever again if something with no arms or legs can do it, you know? That's super special. Now, snakes, just in general, though, they're super, super special creatures. A lot of people are absolutely terrified of them, but we can give you about 5 to 10 reasons as to why not. So, one of those is that snakes, just like our opossum that we met earlier, they're pest control out here. They do a great job of keeping down rodent populations, frog, amphibian populations, any kind of nuisance pest animal that you can think of. They are going to take care of that and eat those up. So super, super important. Also, the large majority of snakes that we see are non-venomous, excuse me. So how can we tell that, Rebecca? If I'm just going to look at a snake and I'm absolutely terrified of snakes, how do I know if it's one I should be hesitant of or not?
Well, number one, I would just be wary of all snakes just in general because, you know, they're really, really important for the environment and we should give them our space and our respect. So, you know, please don't ever go walking up to a pine snake and pick it up like this, right?
100%.
But it's actually very difficult to tell the difference between a venomous and a non-venomous snake. And specifically when it comes to a pine snake like this. First off, she actually has kind of a similar pattern, maybe to like a diamondback rattlesnake or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, she has very similar coloration or pattern. She also has this head here. Now, one big distinguishing factor between a venomous and non-venomous snake is the shape of their head. So your venomous snakes have triangular shaped heads. These guys don't typically, and they don't have much of a neck. However, she can flatten out her head, work those jaws out a little bit wider so that it looks like she has that triangular head. Last but not least, their little tail here, even though she doesn't have a rattle on it, if she sticks this in the leaf litter, she can flick it really fast and mimic that rattling sound. So best of luck telling the difference between whether it's actually venomous or not.
So we always should be hesitant around snakes is the end of the day. But as we always say, they are important, and in most cases, they're not bothering us. So everything that she was just explaining to you that Yzma's able to do, this pine snake's able to do, is for its own protection. Looking like a diamondback rattlesnake is not an evolutionary flaw. It is something that is there to help it survive in this world. If a snake is out on the ground taking a minute to sun and a red-shouldered hawk is from above and it sees that pattern, it is most likely going to think, if it's had a bad experience before with the rattlesnake, that it won't want to do that again. So great little adaptations. Now, another question that people always like to ask, or I always hear, it's like, oh, it's trying to lick me. Is it licking you?
You're so tasty, right? So snakes actually will smell with their tongue. So they have a sensory organ on the roof of their mouth that helps to decipher everything that their tongue is essentially picking up. So if we look at Isma as she moves around, you can see at the end of her face there, she does have a nose. She has 2 little holes. Those are her nostrils. She uses those for breathing and for smelling, just like we do. But their tongue, it's just kind of like extra special in that they can flick it out. They pick up scent particles, chemicals, fun things in the air, and when they bring their tongue back into their mouth, they can tell essentially which direction to go in. And that is simply because they have a forked tongue. It's kind of like a peace sign on the end. So they have a directional sense of smell, exactly. So they can find food, stay away from predators, find a friend, maybe go home. See, she wants to meet a friend right now.
Nice. Well, it's so nice to meet you, girly. Well, you guys, I know we don't have that much time, so I want to be able to meet this last friend of ours.
Can I just see that t-shirt?
Yeah, sure.
Ah.
See, it's just a snake. It is.
All right. So while Rebecca is getting our last educational animal ambassador over here, I want to bring you guys over here because I'm stomping around a little bit and I found 2 bonus fern species. So over there we had 5 fern species. So right over here, this is a bracken fern. So bracken ferns are more typical of uplands. You can see swamp fern there and bracken fern here. That means that we're transitioning from a wetter habitat to a drier habitat. And then the second fern species that I want to show you guys is one of my favorites. Alicia, you can just come right over here. You guys, look at this beautiful fern. Now, it may not look beautiful to you right now because it looks dead, but it's not. This is resurrection fern. Resurrection because it will go into this dormant state that it's in right now where it completely loses all of the moisture in its fronds and it curls up like it's dead. And then when it rains, all of a sudden, all of these explode again into this beautiful green, all within a matter of hours. So resurrection fern and bracken fern, we've got 7 fern species today. And Rebecca has one of my favorites. Let's come over, let's get this beautiful, beautiful live oak tree in the background. And I'm gonna see if this makes any difference for us. We're gonna turn on some studio lights so that we can meet
Looking right at you.
the eastern screech owl. So, Rebecca, tell us a little bit about this owl, how he came in, what's the story?
Yeah, so this is Major Slim Jim. And I just call him Major because I feel like Slim Jim is a little extra. But he has a detached retina in his eye. So if you look really closely in that eye right here,
Oh, I see.
you can see there's a little black line that's kind of outside of his pupil there. That's the retina there. So usually that happens due to some sort of trauma, maybe getting hit by a car or something along those lines.
Okay. And so he is now so this is not a releasable animal.
No, this is not.
And so this is why Major is now one of your educational ambassadors.
100%.
All right. So owls, guys, I love owls, and our eastern screech owl here, just like other owls, has many adaptations that help it be an owl. So first of all, if you look at those feet, you remember the beginning? Those are zygodactyl feet. So you see 2 toes in front, 2 toes in the back. Ooh, he's singing to us a little bit. Like all other owl species, Major has adaptations to his feathers. Right along the ends, they're frayed on all the little featherlets, and that allows Major to fly silently, just like all other owls. That helps them sneak up on their prey, especially when they hunt mainly at night. You will notice that, let's see, will Major follow my finger? Oh, look at, that's perfect. So Rebecca's moving Major's body, and you notice that his head is not moving. Okay. Now, if Major wants to look at me, he's got to turn his head. And that is because all owls have fixed eyes. So those eyes are fixed within their head. And that is to help them brilliantly see in low light. And so they have this adaptation with their neck where if I was an owl, look at that. If I was an owl and I wanted to look at Rebecca, I could turn my head this way and turn it all the way around and look at her. So they can spin their head 270 degrees, and they can do that because those eyes are fixed. So they can't move those eyes independently. The last thing is their facial disc, right? So owls have this facial disc, these feathers around the face. And Rebecca, how does that help these owls hunt?
Yeah, so if you actually look at that little bit, it kind of looks like he's wearing a mask, right? So for an owl, they have many of them, not all, have off-center ears. So one ear will be slightly higher than the other. So for this little guy, he's going to be eating cockroaches, small little critters. So let's say there's a cockroach rustling around down in the leaf litter.
As sound travels to the owl's face, that facial disc is going to pick up all those sound vibrations and draw it directly back to their ears. And then because of that asymmetric hearing, it'll hit one ear a little bit faster than the other. And the owl's brain can calculate exactly where that sound is coming from. So they can essentially find their food without ever having to see it. They can just listen for it.
So, guys, before we talk about males and females, I'm going to get behind it. Think about how crazy that is that Rebecca just said. So one ear is down here, one ear is up here, and then that facial disc funnels sound, and it allows them to essentially be able to see with their ears. That is what allows owls to hunt in very, very low light. Now, at the beginning of the trip, we were talking, Rebecca, about raptors, which owls are, and the differences between males and females. So Major is a male.
I'm guessing he's a male.
And he is very tiny.
Yes.
Very tiny. Okay. The other cool thing about screech owls is this is a gray phase. They also come in a rufous or a red phase. About 30% of our screech owls here in Florida are this red phase. Now, the reason that most raptors, the female is larger than the male, and it very much is represented in our eastern screech owl, is because females are generally the ones that are on the nest, they're incubating the eggs, and they're defending the nest. So they're going to be bigger, badder, stronger. Get out of this nest. Don't mess with my babies. The male, so in other bird species, sometimes the male and the female will deliver food to the chicks. Sometimes they will change off incubating eggs. Not so with owls. So what happens is the male is responsible for bringing in the groceries. So the female stays at the nest, incubates the eggs, defends those chicks, and the male goes out and hunts and gathers all the food. Now, this animal is eating earthworms, insects. It's also eating rodents. It eats bird species that it can catch. They've even been documented catching bats. They're that agile and fast. And the male being smaller means that he is more agile. He's a little more like a fighter pilot, and that gives him the advantage when he's hunting and gathering prey, not just for his mate, but also for those chicks in the nest. And that is why it is very typical for raptors for the male to be smaller than the female. All right, so we got a couple minutes left. Kylie's about to cry over here because this owl is so adorable.
He's making cute little noises. I don't know if you guys can
He
hear
does.
him.
So I want to ask Rebecca how she got to where she is, where she went to school, what brought her to Busch Wildlife.
And Benji, we do have a bunch of questions that I've been patiently holding for the students as well.
Okay, maybe we'll skip that, but I want Rebecca to tell us what an owl sounds like, a screech owl, because they don't sound like hoot hoot. And
No, they definitely don't. They don't do that like hoot hoot that everybody knows and loves. So they do a trilling sound, which sounds like a, and then they also make like a high pitched, it sounds like to me, like a horse has inhaled helium. So a really high pitched whinny, and I'm going to try my best to do it. And it kind of sounds like,
that was it.
there you
Nailed
go.
it. All right, let's do questions and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay, so a couple questions. Is this screech owl fully grown?
Yes.
Yep.
This is an adult male screech owl.
They would also like to know, can owls be pets?
No. So owls, you do not want to keep an owl as a pet. In fact, please, if you ever even think about getting a bird as a pet, some of these, exotics, do your research. If you think it's a great idea to get like a parrot because you want a bird that'll talk to you, just ask yourself if you want that parrot when you're 60 years old. Okay. These birds have incredibly long lifespans. So this is not an animal like a guinea pig that is a lesser commitment. So never recommend wild birds as pets.
All right, and then a couple Busch Wildlife questions. So what kind of animals do you guys take in at Busch Wildlife? And then how do you know that they're actually ready for release and will be able to be like survivable? So the question came in when the opossum, like what are the chances of that opossum being able to adapt back into the environment successfully?
Okay, so with the animals that we bring in all native Florida animals. So we focus on that. That's our mission, is to rescue, rehabilitate, and release those native Florida animals, which are, bears, panthers, bobcats, lots of different types of birds of prey, like our owls, our opossums. So anything native, we'll take it. But when it comes to rehabilitating and releasing animals, it's very difficult to actually know when it's time. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But that opossum was wild to begin with. We didn't need to teach it anything. And even though he looked small, like he was still a baby, that's not a baby opossum. That's one that's actually old enough to be on its own, so it would be considered an adult. So mom has already taught it everything that it needs in order to survive. So essentially, like, we just made him feel better, and then he was probably happy to be back out in the woods as opposed to in a cage, having, people peer in on him and poke at him and things like that. So for most of these animals, by the time they come into us, we get them out the door, and they're really happy to be back out where they belong.
Oh,
So
and we just had a flyover of about 40 white ibis.
Alicia, give them a good view of the sunset on this oak.
As you're looking at this beautiful sunset on this oak, where we just had birds flying into roost. The other thing that Busch Wildlife will do specifically with birds is they will flight test them. So after they have rehabilitated those birds, they'll actually take them into a flight cage and make sure that they can fly on their own. And that also helps to rebuild that strength, right? It's incredible how fast these birds can rebuild that strength, but flight training and flight testing is one of the important things before we release.
and prey testing as well is another one.
Prey testing, making sure that they can hunt successfully. Yeah. Any other questions?
There was one question about like irrigation systems. So they did see how dry it was, and they just want to know, in a case of a severe drought, what would be the method to make sure that everything does get water.
Yeah, no, we don't do that in nature. No irrigation, right? So nature has variability. We have averages, but you will literally almost never have an average year, because an average year is just an average of all of these different water levels. So there are animals that are that live in the swamp, and plants that are adapted to go through these periods of drought, just like they're adapted to go through sitting and standing water. Alligators, again, they'll make those gator holes, allow animals that depend on water to survive by actually deepening an area of the swamp. There are other animals like our giant salamanders that can actually create their own slime cocoon and estivate, go dormant for years at a time, waiting for water to come back. So Wild Florida is just set up to deal with Wild Florida. It's been doing the Florida things that it's done for thousands and thousands of years before we invented irrigation for our pretty lawns in the last 30 or 40 years. Great question, though. That's a wonderful question. Anything else?
No.
I know we're over time.
Yeah, the students are just saying thank you for your time. They have enjoyed seeing all the animals and learning about Wild Florida. And they look forward to the next one.
So thank you, guys. Kylie, thank you. Rebecca, thank you. Major, thank you, buddy. All right,
He looks at you.
we are gonna be back with you guys next month, and fingers crossed, if weather holds, we're gonna be on the fire line doing prescribed fire. So
If we're talking about fire, you guys, a little bit about what we'd be getting into. So
come join us next month. See fire on the ground. We'll see you then.
bye, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
And get outside during Christmas break.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.